Thank you, Katie. I play Katie Kriegel in fantasy football today, and we're both 0-3. So we hope that I hope that I win, and I'm quite sure she's hoping that she wins. So let me ask a question. As Katie mentioned, we are starting a new series today. Let me ask a question. What is your favorite colors? What are your favorite colors? You can purple, red. Okay, you have on red today, Marla. What's orange, green, coral? Coral. Okay, all right, nice, nice. Your favorite colors? What's that? Pink, okay. Blue, and no gold though, right? No maize and blue? Okay, okay, watch it, all right. Okay, what other colors, your favorite colors? Yellow, okay. Well, what's that? Okay, gray. Oh, scarlet and gray. Okay, all right, all right. Well, listen, we have a number of favorite colors. Now, for some, yellow may not be your favorite color, but I think the story of Vincent van Gogh might help you love yellow a little bit more, or at least view yellow differently. Now, this famous Dutch painter, he actually sadly tossed away his faith in Jesus that he learned in his home, and he sank into a deep, deep depression. And he became very destructive. Now, by the grace of God, he actually later began to embrace his faith again, and his life took on a sense of hope. And he gave that hope a color, and that color was yellow. Now the best kept secret of Van Gogh's life is the truth that when he began to come out of his depression, you can begin to see, actually, while he was even in his depression, you can see yellows in his paintings. And that represented hope and the warmth of God's love. Now, in 1889, he actually painted this painting. Many of you know this, The Starry Night. The Starry Night, and I want to draw your attention to a number of different elements in this particular painting. You see big swirls in this painting, and these swirls represent chaos and turbulence. It represents darkness, and it was emblematic of where he was in life. He was in a mental institution when he actually painted this. And in his mind, there was chaos, and in his mind, there was turbulence. And so he actually painted that chaos with big swirls representing that chaos. As you notice, there's a town below, and it feels like the town is being swallowed up in the chaos. And if you notice, if you look very carefully, there is a church there as well that represents, at least it's supposed to represent hope, and it's supposed to represent light, and it's supposed to represent a sense of calm. But it feels like in this town and that church is being swallowed up by the swirling chaos and turbulence. Now, you might also recognize you see the yellows there, the big sun, and then you see the stars. Those are considered points of light. It's not blindingly evident. I mean, it's not blinding in the painting, but there are points of light represented that in the midst of darkness, in the midst of the swirl of chaos and turbulence and darkness, there is goodness in the land. There is a sense of hope in the land. There's a sense of light in the land. just like in our world, that there's chaos and turbulence all around us, but there are points of light we see all around us. There are points of light of God's goodness, like our team that left to go to the Czech Republic last week to take medical kits and books. Points of light in the midst of chaos and turbulence and darkness in our world. It feels like the town is being affected and threatened by the swirling chaos. There's a feeling of an anxious presence in the painting. The church that should be hopeful, there's darkness. In fact, there's a sense where there is no door to the church. There's a sense where the place that should be light and grace and hope-filled, it's not. You can see even, I wonder if you can resonate with this. I think we can. There's political chaos in our world. There's immorality and broken families and financial collapses and educational stress and war and COVID and monkeypox and hunger and poverty and racism and sexism and homophobia and depression and anxiety and unemployment. It feels as if our world is being swallowed up in the swirl of chaos and turbulence. And yet there are points of light around us, not just globally, but even personally. There are people who are listening to me right now. Your own story is one of chaos and turbulence right now. Whether it's a loss of a family member, or whether it's a loss of a job, whether it's something that's going on health-wise for you. And it feels like your world has been turned upside down, and you're experiencing chaos and turbulence and darkness in your life right now. Maybe you're dealing with anxiety and depression, and you're wondering how you're going to make it out. You can resonate with Van Gogh's Starry Night, because for some, you are in the starry night. Now, you see points of light, whether it's the Word of God or whether it's worship, but it feels as if your life is being swallowed up by chaos and turbulence. And when we experience this, we might be tempted to do a few things. We might be tempted to actually practice escapism. Let me just get out of this. Let me just non-engagement of the world around us. You and I might be tempted to be a nihilist. That is, there is no hope at all, so why even engage and live any longer? There might be some just, hey, I'm just waiting it out until Jesus comes back. And so there's this sense where we approach chaos and turbulence in our world in different ways. Or we can practice living godly lives while we wait for Jesus. Listen, my friends, we are exiles in this world. We are not exiles without hope. We are not exiles who cannot sing the Lord's song in this land. We are exiles, but we can still sing God's songs in a turbulent and chaotic and dark land. This is what this series is all about. This series is all about living godly lives as exiles in a turbulent and chaotic world. How do we do that in our world? How do we do that in our family? How do we do that in our neighborhoods? This is exactly why Paul wrote the book of Titus. This is the reason why he actually sent this letter to this young pastor to help the people living in Crete to learn how to live, to continue to live godly lives, so that the world around them might know who Jesus is. Now, the book of Titus is, as you know, as you can see, it's a small, but it's an incredibly powerful book. It sort of helps Christians to understand how, in a chaotic and turbulent and dark world, how to live in accordance with the life that God designed us to live. It really is about our lives influencing others. In short, it's a letter written to help followers of Jesus live as everyday disciples in our own Crete. Now, when I say Crete, that's the place where Titus is living. So let me give you just a little bit of the background of this book so you can kind of get a sense of where we're going. So the author in this book, is conclusively for everyone. It's written by most scholars, written by the Apostle Paul. And here is the. Let me give you just the setting. So Crete is in the Mediterranean Sea. And so as you look, if you look at the map that is that will be there, you'll see the Mediterranean area. And right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea is the little island of Crete. The little island of Crete with a number of different cities. And on those different cities, or in those different cities, there are a number of churches that were planted there. And so this is a small little island. And Paul left Titus there to help bring the church to order, the churches to order. Paul left Titus there to help Christians learn and know how to live godly lives in the midst of a very, very difficult and dark time. Who is Paul writing to? Who is the audience? The audience is, number one, Titus. This young pastor who is kind of nervous and anxious and trying to figure out, how do I help people live life as if how God has designed life to be lived. So it's written to Titus, but it's also written to the other churches in Crete, on the island of Crete. So there are probably about 6 or 7 churches on this island. And Paul is not only writing to Titus, but he's also writing to Christians who are living in Crete. Now, what is the occasion of this, of writing this particular book? Well, Paul writes this to Titus because the churches were established or planted, but they didn't have elders. They didn't have leaders there. The church was just kind of going about its business. And Paul says, hey, I left you in Crete so that you can train up elders, so that the elders can lead the people on how to live godly lives. And so Titus is this young pastor. He was to raise up leaders in these churches. But not only that, he was also to teach in such a way, to teach knowledge and truth that would lead to godliness. And we're going to talk about what godliness is in a few minutes. So he was not only to set the churches in order, to set up leaders, but he was also to say, here is what God says, here is the truth, and now I want you to align your life with that truth, so that when people see your life, they will see God in your life as you live. That's the reason Paul writes this book. That's the reason he writes Titus. So I want you to take a look at Titus 1, and he gives us an idea of what this, of the reason for this book. Titus 1, Titus. If you get to Timothy, just go one book over. You can also look in the table of contents, but it's also 998 if you're looking on the church Bible, or the Bible that the church provides. So it says, Paul, a servant of God and an apostle of Jesus Christ, for the sake of the faith of God's elect and their knowledge of the truth, which accords with godliness. And so if you had an equation, the equation would look something like this. You have knowledge, truth. We're downloading knowledge, and we're not downloading. Titus was not to download knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So that knowledge of God and that knowledge of the way God wanted us to live, it actually is, this is reality. This is God's reality. Another word for truth. And now he says, now that you have knowledge, now that you have truth, now that knowledge and truth should lead to a life that actually says this is the way God desires you and I to live. This is the reason why he writes this book. Now, we think of godliness. We hear the term godliness or holiness, and we say, man, it's typically no drinking, no smoking, and no dancing, and no dating girls who chew and all that kind of stuff. So I think it goes something like that, right? That was Baptist, I guess. So, but godliness is more than not doing something. Godliness is more than it's not just what we should not do. Godliness is more than legalistic limitations. It really is about experiencing the joy and life and peace and hope and the reign and the rule of God in our lives, in this present world, in this present chaotic and dark and turbulent world, so that the world might see that there is hope beyond the darkness. There is hope beyond the chaos. There is hope beyond the turbulence. And so there's this sense where godliness is about not thou shalt not. Now, where it's not about not doing something, it is about a sense of self-control. And throughout the book of Titus, you're going to see this word self-control, which actually helps us to walk godly lives. This word self-control appears throughout the entire book, and it actually, again, it shapes our thinking as to what godliness is. So I want you to take a look at chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. Very quickly, it says, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live," here's our word, "self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age." So for Titus, self-control was a big deal. If you go back to verse 1 or chapter 1 in verse 8, you'll see it again, talking about the context of elders, but hospitable, and they're to be hospitable, a lover of good. Here's our word, self-controlled. If you go back to chapter 2, verse 2, it says, older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, here it is, self-controlled. If you go to stay in chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, you'll see the same thing. It says, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good and to train the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then verse 6, likewise, younger men to be self-controlled. Here's something interesting about this word, and a question that we should ask. Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. So why is it called self-control and not spirit control? Why is it called self-control and not spirit control? Well, here's the reason. The Spirit of God is living inside of every believer. And because the Spirit of God is living inside of every believer, his purpose is to transform us, directing us so that we might be under control, so that we might be under the control of God in a chaotic and dark and turbulent world. The one person that ought to be able to handle the chaos and the turbulence around us without flying off the handle, it should be followers of Jesus. The followers of Jesus should not be on social media flying off the handle, being out of control, saying what comes out and what comes up that comes out. The one person that ought to be stable in a chaotic and turbulent world is those who call Jesus Lord. Now, I'm not saying that we're perfect, but when the world looks around us, when the world looks at us and when the world looks around its surroundings and Christians are in the darkness and Christians are in the turbulence and Christians are in the chaos, we ought to be Van Gogh's points of light in chaos. And so Paul tells Titus, I want you to practice self-control. I want the Spirit of God to be so active in your life and the lives of people around you that they may see Jesus. So there's chaos, and Paul says, I want you to create leaders that help bring a sense of order to a chaotic world. Now, I told you that Van Gogh's Starry Night was painted in 1889, and it was during a time where he was depressed, and his paintings reflected that depression and was emblematic of his state of mind. But there's another painting that Van Gogh did in 1890, and it is the raising of Lazarus. The raising of Lazarus. If you look at this painting, you see this painting, notice it is blindingly yellow. It is not dark like the Starry Night. It is yellows, and yellows are popping literally all over the place. Now, here's the key. It is when Van Gogh began to come out of his depression, when Van Gogh began to come out of his own personal chaos, he began to paint, and now you see hope. Now you see light. Now you see peace. Now you see calm. Now, Van Gogh was a follower of Jesus, and he says, I am coming out of my depression, I am coming out of my hopelessness, and there's this sense where my hope is found in the resurrection of Jesus. So this painting is painted from a sketch from Rembrandt in the 1600s. So what he does in Rembrandt's painting, it's very, very dark. But Van Gogh says, I am going to paint something that reflects who I am and where I am right now. If you notice, that is, we have no real pictures of Lazarus, so most people think that Van Gogh painted his own face on Lazarus's body, representing my own resurrection, my own hope, my own coming out of my own depressive feelings. And so, when we look at the two, we see points of light in the Starry Night. And now we see blindingly yellow hopefulness. And we look at this particular series. We hope that this series will move us from the Starry Night to the raising of Lazarus. We hope that this series, as we walk through this particular series, it will help us be the points of light, not just points of light, but that we would flood our world with hope so that people might know Jesus is alive. Now, how this series will go is we will do something a little differently than we've done in the past. Instead of going verse by verse through a book, we're going to actually let Titus be the launching point of certain topics in this series. My good friend Jim Samra actually helped to solve a tension that I have, that is expositional preaching, that is preaching through a book and then dealing with topics that might be relevant to where we live right now. And so Titus is going to be the jumping off point, picking topics from Titus. Titus is the one who's going to pick the topics for us. And then we're going to use the larger part of Scripture to talk about those topics. Now, part of the reason why this is so important is because in Crete, Crete was known as a island filled of liars, an island filled of gluttons, an island filled with violence. Crete was violent, and it was dark, and it was chaotic, and it was turbulent. And Paul says, Titus, churches are there to be points of light and hope in the world. And so, imagine Christians on the island of Crete and violence all around them. Do they participate in the violence, or do they be points of light in the midst of a violent and chaotic and turbulent world? Can you imagine Christians who saw drinking parties going on? How do we understand alcohol? Because Titus deals with that. How do we understand violence? Because Titus deals with that. How do we live as families how do we live as godly families? Titus deals with that. How do we live as couples who their marriage is healthy and vibrant and thriving to impact others around them? Titus actually deals with that. How do we deal with aging well? Titus deals with that. How do we deal with integrity and being blameless and above reproach? Titus deals with that. How do we handle anger? Titus deals with that. How do we handle humility and pride? Titus actually deals with that. How do we live in a world that's we're getting bad news? How do we be the good news in a world that's chaotic and turbulent? Titus deals with that. And over the next several months, we're going to go deep in these particular topics. How do we be civil in an age of politics? Titus deals with that. Titus calls us to be points of light, to move from the starry night to the raising of Lazarus, so that the world might see this is what God desires. And this is not godliness for the sake of godliness. This is godliness so that others around us might be impacted. My friends, I tell you, it looks dark around us. It looks like darkness and turbulence and chaos is winning. It looks like everything around us is falling and going to hell in a handbasket. But because you and I are in the world, and because you and I are followers of Jesus, because you and I carry the hope of the gospel of Jesus, at least we should, I can say unequivocally, everything is going to be all right. we can say that because we are in the world and because we are the light of God in the world, everything is, darkness will not win, chaos will not win, turbulence will not win. Jesus was raised from the dead. He is living inside of you and me, and wherever we go, in our neighborhood, on our jobs, we are points of light. And we preach wherever we go, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. But we have to live that way. We have to live with Van Gogh's hope. Not just the starry night, but the raising of Lazarus. And if you have trusted Jesus as Savior, He has raised you from death to life. And He wants you and I to carry that hope into the world. Everything's going to be all right. Wouldn't you say? Everything's going to be all right. Let's talk about it. Bless you, man.